What it means is that the rule was not intended to be prescriptive. It was not intended to be directly, you have to do exactly this in this certain way, no matter what the way your organization operates is. No, it's supposed to be applicable to a wide variety of types and sizes of operators. Therefore, the requirements are meant to be scalable, really, or allowing you to integrate safety management into your unique business model. So, one question I like to ask, and I'm not going to be able to get y'all's responses in person, but, who thinks under the current Part 5 rules that a Part 135 operator could abide by and get their SMS system approved by the FAA under the current Part 5? Guessing everyone's going to say, no, there's no way that was intended for 121. What the heck is she talking about? Well, I'm here to tell you that it was able to be done and it was able to get accepted by a small Part 135, 5-ship, 10 pilot operation. But it doesn't mean that you're going to have to do it exactly under the current Part 5 rules, because as I mentioned, there's updated ones coming out that are really going to be a focus for the Part 135. But rather than think about scalability and how the heck does this big word, or even not a big word, but complicated measure really apply to your organization, let's rephrase this. Let's reframe it to instead a condition-based approach. And what I mean by a condition-based approach is let's look at SMS, the regulations that are going to be coming out or are currently there, and how that applies to the conditions under which your individual operation is under. So there's 5 things that we'd want to look at when we're looking at a condition-based approach. You're going to be thinking what I'd like you guys to think is in your individual operation. Don't be thinking about American Airlines. Don't be thinking about Delta. Think in my individual operation, how these apply. So first, you're going to need to look at the size and complexity of the organization as well as its products and services. What types of services are you operating? Are you a 2-ship operation? How many pilots do you have? Is it really complex? Are you going to many places abroad? Are you solely domestic or regional? Look at that, as well as the operating environment. That again is, are you located, in one place, or are you going international? That's going to really help you depend on, if you have an international environment that you're operating with under, you're going to need to look at different areas to apply SMS to within that operation. Also, the volume and type of data available, not just to your organization. You're going to want to see what type of data do we have available? What management systems do we have in place? Where have we gotten data from that is going to allow us to look individually at our SMS system, but also the type of data available within the industry, within the Part 135 world. Next, you're going to want to look at the size and distribution of your employee workforce. If you are operating out of one place, we know it's really easy because there's a lot of communication that happens when you're all in the same room or same building. However, if you have a very large workforce or your workforce is distributed across the country, such as NATA, I know Steve is over there in North Carolina. I think Brandon is in South Carolina or North Carolina. I'm in Tennessee. Distributed. How do you get that messaging across? And how do you make sure that the SMS system isn't just going on at headquarters or in one of your operations, but how do you do it across the board? And then what resources are needed to manage the SMS within this organization? If you are only located in one area, you could really probably likely use less resources than you would on an international scale. Also, how many workforce employees do you have? The scale of that. So really thinking about these types of, these parts of your organization to then apply SMS as a condition-based approach to it. Next, we're going to look at the preconditions. These are 2 preconditions you really need to have before you start implementing your SMS. If you don't have these, I don't know that you're going to be able to get an SMS on the books and able to do it correctly. So let's make sure that you have these preconditions. First, your accountable executive for SMS must have a working knowledge of your operational environment. First thing I hear a lot of times when I talk to different operators that hear that there is a new SMS rule coming out is that they go, well, I'm just going to hire a consultant to do it. Look, I was a consultant. I have a very strong love for consultants. However, do you think consultants know your operation inside and out as well as your employees do? No. You're likely going to hire them and they're going to spend the first 20 to 30 hours that you're paying them just to have a working knowledge of the operational environment that you're under. And will they still be able to understand the ins and outs as well as your team? Probably not. So you want to make sure that you have a team member that understands the working knowledge of this operational environment that can be your accountable executive. Next, this person, as well as the team, really the overall team, needs to have a knowledge and understanding of the requirements. These are the requirements that are coming out in the new updated Part 5 regulations. But it doesn't just mean having your lawyer read over it and say, oh, we can put a policy in place. That's not going to work. That's not really enhancing safety. Yeah, you might be able to check the boxes, but is that really enhancing aviation safety, enhancing safety for your organization? No. You want to understand how you can take these requirements and put it into place within the operational environment that you are in. Here also, you're not going to be going to the FAA saying, tell me what's good, tell me how I meet this. No, you want to be going to the FAA saying, this is what's good, this is how I meet the regulations. And that's why we call it a performance-based regulation. You're telling them, hey, I've done this, this, and this. We're going to get that done. And what we do believe, I'm not going to say it officially, but what we do believe that's going to be required in the new Part 5 updated regulations is going to be that the operator submit a system description, a compliance statement, and an ethics statement. And this doesn't mean that you're just going to go to the FAA and say, what do I do for my systems description? No, you get to write that. And you get to tell them how your system description is in play and how the SMS works within your systems description. Really explaining your operational environment to the FAA, telling them how you are doing the SMS world good. So next, we're going to go on to the SMS framework. So we see this big circle here and you're like, oh gosh, a framework, a whole nother thing I got to deal with. Well, here, this is not to say, the reason it's in a circle is because it's an ongoing process. The SMS framework never stops. It's not that you create a policy and you're done with it. No. So we're going to be going in depth on each of these for desired outcomes and challenges. But first, I want to give an overview of what each of these means. The policy and objectives, that is the key structure to your SMS program. You have to have a structure in place before you build anything else out. Next, safety risk mitigation or management, excuse me. Safety risk management is, first of all, identifying the hazards. And what's a hazard? Anything that can cause harm. So you're going to be identifying those hazards, and then you're going to create different risk mitigation techniques to do that. Now, if safety risk management is the do, quote unquote, safety assurance is the checking of the do. And that is really the oversight, seeing if your processes that you've put in place, seeing if you've if the risk mitigation techniques you have put there are working and working as they were meant to, or have you, changed something and created instead unintended consequences. Again, this is an ongoing cycle. Anytime you make a change, you want to make sure you're rerunning this program, but you also want it ongoing. And that's good. We're going to go into data there as well. And finally, safety promotion. Safety promotion is all around safety culture. I think if anyone was like me yesterday and had C-SPAN on in the background, they likely saw the hearings taking place in regards to Boeing. One of the number one phrases that I counted, I think almost 100 times, was safety culture. And safety culture is key. You can have a process in here, but if you don't have a proper safety culture within your overall organization, you're not going to do well. So next, let's go back to safety policy and objectives. What are the desired outcomes? What do you want within this policy? First of all, you want the organization to have a commitment to safety. That needs to be number one thing in your safety policy as you're writing it out. But just because you put something in a policy, how many times do you think your team actually reads it? Besides lawyers, maybe? And are the lawyers even reading it? I don't know. You don't want to just have that commitment. You don't want to just have that little statement in there. You want to live that. You want to have it written down. You want to have it forefront of things, but you want to have it in multiple different capacities, really getting out that message to the commitment to safety. And that's why you're creating the policy and objectives. A lot of you on here might be your team safety management system, or your SMS leaders or the safety managers. This commitment to safety, it needs to be bought in at the highest level as well as the lowest level of your organization. So it needs to be every person in your organization committing to safety. Next, in your policy, as I said, it's a structure. So you're going to define what your individual safety objectives are and what SPIs, as I might call them. So everyone, their little decoder rings on. That means acronym decoder ring, excuse me. That means safety performance indicators. So what safety performance indicators do you need to define within your operation? And this is going to differ. The SPIs that American Airlines is looking at are going to be different than the SPIs that you look at. Some may be the same, some may be different, but look at what safety performance indicators you need based on the conditions that you're operating under. Next, you want a safety structure that fits. It might be easy to say, hey, I'm going to go borrow my buddy's. He works for another Part 135 or he works for a Part 121. We'll just put that in place here. Do you think that safety structure is going to fit with the conditions you operate under? No, every organization is different. So you really want to make sure that the safety structure fits, and it fits all 5 of those levels that we discussed on the second slide that I went over. Does it fit your workforce level? Does it fit your resources? Next, as I've mentioned, you're going to have a person accountable for the implementation of SMS. This person needs to be a practitioner of SMS. They need to understand it inside and out. And here I'm going to give a little plug, because a lot of NATA members have been coming to us saying, hey, how am I going to get up to speed besides watching these wonderful webinars? How am I going to get my person trained in SMS? So what I'd like to let you all know is that NATA has partnered with the DOT's Transportation Safety Institute, and through that partnership, there is an air transport safety management certification course. I took it my 3rd week on the job. It is fantastic. It teaches you, it's a 5-day course. It teaches you the ins and the outs. And guess what? If you're a NATA member, you get a discount to send someone to this course. If you have questions about that, please feel free to reach out to myself, Brandon, or Steve about that. Brandon really leads that partnership for us, but this is a great way to get yourself trained, and really trained by people that are from the DOT. So it's a really great aspect, and it goes through all these in much more depth than I can do within an hour. So next, after you get that person accountable for implementation of SMS, they're trained, they're certified, they're great. What do you look at? You want to make sure that you've defined the safety related accountability and responsibilities. Who is accountable for each part of this? Although you have that accountable executive, they might not be accountable for every step of the process, especially if you're a larger organization. You also need to make sure that each team member understands the individual responsibilities that they need to take part in. If you just think that, oh, I signed someone to be on the safety team, but they have no idea what they're doing, they're actually going to be able to achieve these responsibilities, be held accountable? No. So that you really need to define these in a detailed manner. Next, you need to provide knowledge, experience, and resources to perform the safety related duties. So although you may have defined these accountability and responsibilities, if your team member has never been trained on this, and they don't have the experience or the resources to be able to perform these duties, your SMS is not going to go anywhere. So you need to make sure that you're providing training. Also, you need to make sure that the safety process and procedures that you've put in place are kept current. Anytime there's a change in the operation, evaluate your safety process and procedures. Anytime you've identified a new hazard, there might be new data. Even if it's not a hazard that's within your operations, is it one that you all might be operating under the conditions of your organization? So if you hear about one, look at this and keep your safety process and procedures current. Just because you've put a structure in place, it's not one of those things you never revisit. You put on your website, good to go. Hello, DOT, here it is. No, you want to keep reevaluating this. Next, what are the challenges? You might be thinking it's easy to write a safety structure. I got it. We'll have some basics, look at a template online. But you need to think about the challenges. One is keeping safety policy communicated and reinforced. That's within the organization. I think we've all been in break rooms where they might have a little poster up on the wall saying, this is our policy. How many people think they read it unless they're really bored in a meeting? Probably not very many people are looking at that poster. They're probably seeing it and ignoring it. So how are you in your organization communicating and reinforcing this safety policy? Not communicating it once, not saying this is critical, we got to do it right when the rule comes out. But in 2025, how many times have you communicated and reinforced this within your organization? Also, are you reinforcing it with your new team members? Are you reinforcing it with the people that have been there for 20 years? Making sure every person understands this commitment. And I will say that after watching yesterday's hearings, that was a constraint that many of the whistleblowers did talk about, was the lack of communication of safety policy. And that is not saying that just one organization is having challenges with that. Every organization I know is having challenges keeping this safety policy communicated. Next, what resource constraints do you have? You might need to be thinking about hiring on a new SMS manager for your team, or how can you go about, you might need to increase headcount. As I've mentioned, you might need to allocate some budget to it. The FAA is not putting this policy in place to make Part 135 go out of business. They want you to they want you to stay in business, and they believe that making sure that your operation is safe is keeping you in business. So putting some money aside to help get this system up and going and continuing to revisit it is really key. Also, if you're a smaller organization, you may need to assign multiple safety related roles to individuals. So if you're a 5-person operation, there might be 3 people really focused on safety, not saying it's their only job, but how you're assigning these related roles. Next, ongoing training and professional development. You may think training, great. Train the individuals once they understand it. No. I'm going to give an example that not a lot of people think about, but as we all probably remember, about 10 years ago, MH370, the Malaysian flight went missing. It was just the 10-year anniversary about a month ago of that flight going missing. Now, this isn't in regards to the flight going missing, but it is in regards to training. I think all of us, including the Malaysian Airlines officials, as well as the Malaysian government officials, had all been trained in cybersecurity. We all know if you get an email that seems a little odd, do we click on it? No, we try not to. You put in this spam or you get it checked. But everyone's trained on that. Are they trained on it in a crisis situation? And this is where I'm going with this. Training in different types of situations. So the day after that flight went missing, the high-level officials at the Malaysian Airlines, the Malaysian Aviation Department, as well as the National Security Council all received emails. Obviously, everyone is in crisis. They're checking their emails quickly. They're not thinking, what training have I gone through? This is the same in any other type of situation. They're not necessarily thinking of training. You need to make sure this is back. This is always forefront of mind. They get an email. The subject line says plane found. Well, guess what? They almost all of them opened it and they clicked the attachment without thinking twice. That attachment was malware, and it was a cybersecurity attack on the organizations. Now, did this have anything to do with the plane going missing? No, I don't think so. But there's bad actors that like to take advantage of different situations. So although you might be training in one measure, you need, especially within the safety world, to be training in different types of environments, different types of communications, and making sure that your teams are always going to remember this, whether it's a crisis or an everyday occasion at the in the office. Next, you're going to want to make sure that you're updating and you're distributing safety management system documents in a timely manner. Just because you update it in your system, have you actually distributed it to people that need to know about it? Make sure you're doing this and you're not taking weeks to do it on end. You need to make sure everyone's understanding it. Next, you want to identify existing processes that can be leveraged. Creating a safety management system can seem overwhelming, but really all it is a management system. I guarantee almost every single one of you on the call already has management systems in place where you can take some of those systems and change them to then somehow fit you and be utilized by your safety management system. And therefore, you're not having to reinvent the wheel. Next, let's go on to safety risk management. I heard a quote the other day that said, practical safety is risk management. So, how do we look at the desired outcomes here? Well, you want to take a proactive approach. You really want to look at the overall, your overall system, and you want to be able to proactively identify hazards. So you're going to obviously have developed new process and procedures to identify those hazards, but also look at the data that you already have to identify those hazards. Next, you want a process that is continually assessing and managing risk in a manner that's consistent with your organization's safety objectives. I heard a gentleman speak last week at the American Airlines SMS Industry Forum, and he gave a really great example. He was going in to audit a safety management system for a company. This was a company abroad, but they did line inspection and aerial firefighting. But when he came in, they were so excited to tell them that they had identified slip and fall risks within the hangar. I guess the hangar was a slippery floor. Haven't been there, can't tell you. But guess what? They hadn't had any falls there in a year. So they had really mitigated that risk. Do you think that was probably the top hazard that he was concerned with auditing, as they have helicopters up inspecting these lines? I mean, it's good they haven't had any falls. It's great, less liability, but let's look and see what's meeting the safety objectives within this. You want to make sure that you're focusing on key safety objectives in a priority manner, but looking at it also as an overall scape. So making sure that your processes are meeting, continually assessing and managing the risk in these manners. So next, one thing with safety risk management, as we've stated, you're going to want to have you want to implement a robust reporting system. But first, you got to figure out how you're going to have a reporting system. One of the things is obviously identifying the hazards. And with the hazards, there's going to be hazards that are of all kinds. Like I said, there's the slip and fall one. You can have bird strikes. There's all types of hazards. Which ones are the most key in your organization? Which ones are you dealing with the most? But also thinking about it on a spectrum. In a US Supreme Court case in 1980, there was a good quote that stated, safety is not equivalent to risk-free. And no matter how much we have gotten to be able to mitigate risks and identify hazards, aviation is a dangerous business. We're never going to be able to get that risk down to zero, but we want to get it down to zero as close as possible. So this is why it's really key to implement a robust reporting system in for any hazards, any issues that come up. And making sure that it's not just let me fill out the document, put it on my boss's desk, and that's, I've reported it system. No, you want to be able to have it in a database that's going through and allows you to check these. Next, you want to ensure confidentiality and anonymity in reporting. This might not always be possible, especially if you're a three-man team. That someone's got to report it. Are you going to go guessing around? Did Brandon report it? Did Steve report it? You don't want to be playing that game. Instead, that's going to go a lot into safety culture. But how can you have a reporting system that is robust and encourages your team to make these reports, give their also thoughts on them, give their potential solutions, getting key team members that not necessarily are in the safety division, but that might be working on it or might have new eyes on it are great ways to not only report, but also understand the problem in a holistic view. Next, hazard identification and how to retain data. So again, you want to be reporting these, but you want to make sure your data system is up to speed. Also, what data can you get from industry partners? What can you get from trade associations? FAA's head of safety, Dave Bolter, stated last week that we have the answer to the next accident, but we don't have the info yet. What he meant in this is that the answer to the next accident is likely in your data. So you need to be looking at this data. Sometimes it can get overwhelming, but what you need is this data and then a system that helps you identify where your other systems might not be working, where there's gaps in this. That data is really key for this. So you need to be able to get data capture and analysis tools. And this is where some of the resources or budget might need to come in for this, as well as creating and managing a robust hazard log database. So safety assurances, this is the oversight. This is really looking at the, if your risk mitigation techniques are working properly. In this, you're going to use the relevant SPIs, so safety performance indicators, to measure and monitor your organization's safety performance in a manner that achieves your objectives. As we've talked about, you really want to make sure it's achieving the objectives. Just because you're meeting an SPI or your SPI is working properly does not mean that you're necessarily meeting the safety objectives. You also want to make sure you have a proactive safety management process. Like I said, if one of your competitors or an industry colleague is telling you about a new risk or a new hazard, how can you put that hazard in if it's going to be based on if it's something that you could come across and the conditions you operate under? How can you be proactive in managing this process of that and identifying those hazards, creating risk mitigation, and then checking that risk mitigation. Also, you want to make sure that there is organizational value that you continually enhances safety performance. You don't want this to be, oh, we've checked it off, the system's working great, never need to run the system again. No, it needs to be continually looking at how you can enhance safety. So let's look at the challenges of safety assurance. Well, there's some limitations of data that can be used to measure safety performance. The answer is to look at the data, but also look at the overall scope. Get opinions of your team members. Your pilots are experts in an area, your mechanics are experts in an area. Everyone has their expertise. So along with the data, get the insights from them, get the insights from the people on the ground. This is really key. As well as you want to protect individuals. As I mentioned, the confidentiality and anonymity can be a little difficult in a smaller operation. I'm going to give an example of a Part 135 operator that I had the opportunity to visit quite a few years ago. I was doing a tour of their amazing facilities, thinking everything was great, and then I went into the operations room. On the board, of the operations room, there was a list of names. So it might have said, I'll use my name first. It might have said Jenny Ann, Brandon, Steve. Then it had a number next to it. That number wasn't their salary. The reason that they were listed up there was because they reported an error or they caused an issue. They made a mistake. The number next to it was the amount that they cost the company. Do we think people are going to come forward if they think their name's going to be on the top of the board and how much they cost the company's going to be up there? Also, do you think the CEO ever put their name up there? I mean, I don't know for sure, but I doubt it. So how do you really protect individuals reporting these errors? If you have someone that's too scared to report an error, that is just a collapse of the safety management system. You want people to come forward saying, hey, this is it. Or even if there's not an error that's come into place, if they foresee something, this is a proactive model that looks at the conditions that you operate under. So you want to protect them. You want to encourage people to come forward with that. And that's going to have a lot to do with the culture as well, that we'll get into in a second. Next, you want to make sure that your SPIs are measurable and relevant. So again, look back at, it was great that that company didn't have any slip and falls, but was that as much relevant to the hazards that they were facing in regards to aerial firefighting? No. So you want to make sure they're also measurable. If you put a safety performance indicator in that you really can't measure and it's just there, likely not going to be as beneficial to you as one that really allows you to measure it. Next, recognizing that changes may be related to safety performance. So really the organizational changes that you put into place could have come about because of your safety performance going well or not going well. As well as recognizing the need to continually improve the SMS processes. No one can get stuck in their ways with SMS. Do not get stuck in your ways. This is not an area that we can get stuck in our ways. You got to just keep improving, keep looking at ways to better it. Go to industry forums, go to educational sessions. How can you improve your SMS processes? You want to be the best safety management system that is on the market right now. You also, if you focus solely on the data, you're not getting the holistic approach. You got to look at the overall picture, as I've mentioned, utilize those SPIs, but also utilize your team, utilize other capacities. And finally, assess SMS effectiveness predicated upon change within the organization. Finally, we are going to get into safety promotion. As I mentioned, safety promotion is the culture. I know a lot of people think, oh, we don't need a cheerleader to come in and say, ooh, rah, yay, safety culture. True, you don't. You need to be promoting this every single day. Yeah, in yesterday's hearing, it was acknowledged that if you as a leader, or if your leader has time, and I'm not saying any of these other departments are not as critical, but if your C-suite has time to meet with marketing folks, finance folks, the legal team each week, they dang well should be making sure to be meeting with the safety team as well. Now, this doesn't have to be on a weekly basis for you all. It needs to be on a basis that works within the conditions you operate under. Again, condition-based approach, but really it needs to be both top down and as well as bottom up. Every single person needs to be promoting safety in the organization. So here you want to make sure the managers and staff have the skills and knowledge required to perform their SMS functions. So having that and looking at where they can maybe get more training, where they can enhance their skills and knowledge, as well as ensuring that new hires get the training that they need and are not just put into these functions without that. Next, remaining proficient in performing these functions. So you want to do tests. I think we all know there's different certification measures every few years in different capacities, but you need to ensure that your team understands these, not just on a one-time basis, but going over it continually and doing different checks on it. And one of the recommendations I have is do it in different situations. Think about that MH370 example I gave earlier with the training. You don't want to train people under the best situations. You want to also train them so that they can deal with it in the worst of situations. And next, the internal and external communication strategy. So you want to make sure that the flow of information is happening all throughout the industry. You don't want someone saying, oh, don't report that. I'm too scared. I don't want to get in trouble with that. No, you want to make sure the communication is going upwards and downwards with the encouragement to continually improve safety and share that information among the team members. So the challenges around safety promotion. So training should be consistent with an individual's safety related roles and responsibilities. How does the training meet with what they're required to do? How does it, encourage them to promote safety? If you have someone that is being trained on an area of safety and you might think that's good, they're being trained on safety. Wonderful. What does that safety area have anything to do with what they're assigned? If not, that's not a great safety promotion. It might be great background knowledge, but making sure that the training meets their roles and responsibilities and encouraging your team members to come forward and say, hey, I need more training on this. Determining, as I've mentioned, the most effective means to deliver training that is relevant and current. I think there's been a lot of us that maybe you've gotten on a training video and said, oh, I'm just going to skip through all these videos or put them at speed 2.5 or as fast as I can, not really listen to them. That's not an effective means to deliver training. Also, something that works for one team member might not work for another team member. Think about different generational differences and how the training works. Some might be hands-on. Others might need it in writing to really read and evaluate. See what works best for your team and within the conditions you operate under. Also, don't underestimate the importance of communicate the work being done to encourage this safety promotion and stuff. As well as don't fail to appreciate the need for two-way communication from players. I'm going to give an example. So those of you might remember on September 29th, 2006, and excuse me if I mispronounce the names of this, my Spanish is not very good, but the Gol Transportes Aéreas and the Excel Air aircraft collided. That is when the Gol Part 121 carrier, if it was operating in the US, it would have been considered a Part 121 operator, went down, killing all 104 people on board. That was after it collided with a business jet that was actually being flown for the first time with the Air Excel. It was Excel Air, being delivered. We actually have a member that was survived and was on that business aircraft. So the reason I'm bringing up this situation was because one of the key reasons they saw that they found that this collision happened in flight, as you would think ATC, how do two aircraft collide in flight? Well, that was the lack of communication that was decided under the Brazilian air traffic control. They also had been trained to follow certain patterns of passing off the communication to another team member. But although they'd been trained on this, they weren't doing it properly. Some of them did it too early. They passed off the ATC controls to the next ATC operator too early, not also sharing and having two-way communication, not following their training. And there wasn't any checks on this. How many times was this occurring within it? Again, this was in 2006, so nearly 20 years ago. And obviously this is likely improved within the Brazilian air traffic or ATC, but it's a good example of the need to appreciate two-way communication, appreciate training and the checks to make sure training is going on and really promoting safety and not allowing just because your team's been trained and they're doing their work and they're checking it off that creates safety promotion, because it doesn't. There needs to be checks and balances there, as well as encouraging team members to understand why they are assigned these duties and what implications can come if the safety provisions are not followed. And finally, looking at resource constraints. Were people in that example, they say that they weren't being paid enough and they were overworked, and there was different examples there. I try to use very big examples so that it really sticks in your head as just a way to think about it. Not saying that this would be a condition that you might need to be worried about, because the conditions you operate under are all different. But what resource constraints are hampering your safety promotion, your SMS system, and overall your safety culture? So finally, we've gone through the whole framework. Yay, y'all made it. You bared with me. So finally, let's look at the implementation principles. So recognizing you might be thinking, great, how is my organization do this? This is going to be such a heavy lift. Oh my gosh, the FAA, how are they doing this? Again, remember, you're enhancing safety. That's why this is here. No one is there to be the bad guy. You want to recognize that all organizations are facing implementation challenges. So one way that you can help overcome this is by looking at the conditions you operate under and how it fits within your organization, not necessarily comparing it to what's out there right now. Next, leveraging the existing processes you have in place wherever possible. Look at the management systems you have in place and see how you might be to utilize some of those management systems to put in your safety management system. Next, ensure that the processes that you're putting in place add value by achieving the desired outcomes. You don't want to put a process in place, and no one wants to deal with extra processes that aren't adding any value, that aren't adding to the outcome that aren't achieving the desired outcome. Make sure every process has a reason you're doing that. Also, make sure that when you put a process into place, you're doing that safety assurance check, because you don't want to put a new process in place and have unintended consequences because you haven't checked it or haven't thought that through. Last but not least, you want to ensure that the processes are implementable and sustainable. Just because you create a process that you think might work great, oh, hey, we've checked the box. We are now in compliance with Part 5, the updated Part 5 rules. FAA is just going to applaud us. If you put a process into place that your team can't implement and is not sustainable within the operation, think about your operations every day. It's not just a one-day thing that you're putting this in. Every single day, is that process sustainable for your operations to work under the conditions that you operate within? So finally, that is not saying the webinar is over. Don't leave us just yet. But what I do want to encourage you all to do is, so this was part 1 of a short series, and we'll likely have more than just 2 parts eventually. But next, I'd like to encourage you all to sign up for part 2 of our SMS series, which is going to be on dispelling myths about the upcoming and updated expanded Part 5 SMS rule. That's going to be on May 9th. It's going to be at 1 p.m. Eastern, and you can sign up the same way you did for this, as well as we have a really exciting Air Charter Summit coming up. That's going to be in Oklahoma City on June 25th. And one panel that we are having is going to be the FAA Safety Office, and they're going to be talking on our safety management system process, or safety management systems panels. So you'll be able to hear a little bit more from them on what they expect, and who knows, if the rules out by then, the updated rules out by then, they might even be able to go into more detail. If not, they'll at least be able to talk about the NPRM. And really, I know that they do value your insight as operators that are dealing with this insight every single day. So I would encourage you to come to our Air Charter Summit again, June 25th, Oklahoma City. If you are interested, have questions about it, please reach out to me. I am leading that charge on it. So would just encourage you to sign up both for the webinars as well as the summit. And so finally, I am going to turn it over for questions. And for these questions, I have Mr. Steve Barry and Brandon that are going to help answer some of these. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you, Jenny Ann. Really appreciate that very thorough overview of a conditions-based approach to SMS. For the folks that are in the audience, on the bottom of your Zoom interface there, you're going to see a little Q&A tab. If you want to type your questions into there, we'll do our best to get them answered. We'll give you a couple of seconds to collect your thoughts if you don't have anything chambered. But feel free to use that Q&A section at the bottom. As soon as you put those in, we will see them populate on our end, and we will be able to work through them. Nobody jumping at the bit just yet. Maybe I'll try to give us a little bit of an icebreaker, Jenny Ann. Oh, here we go. Hold on. From Michael Castro, why do you think 135 struggle with implementing SMS into their work environment, and how do you help leadership understand SMS? Brandon, Jenny, you guys want to touch on that?
Brandon, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. So something I've heard is it's going to go back to that the word that Jenny used, and she's not a big fan of scalability. And I think that is where at least the 135 operators I've spoken to and I've had interactions with, they're really looking at, and I think it was because the 121 world received this first, and they're thinking it's a huge undertaking
Right.
to create an SMS, and we need to hire a safety department. Some of those responsibilities can be absorbed with your current staff, and I think that may be there may be other things out there, but that is from my experience out of what I've heard from multiple operators, from a single operator that I've had the pleasure of working alongside of, to an operator that had 25 aircraft at 2 different locations, 2 different cities in the Southeast. And they're looking at that as, can I afford this? I need to hire a department to take care of this. I've also heard a story of a single operator single airplane, single pilot, single operator, and he had a consultant come in, an SMS consultant come in, and within 48 hours of the initial consultancy, he had an SMS. It wasn't a big, robust system. He didn't have to really put any capital into it. It wasn't a big system he had to purchase. He created an SMS in two 1-inch binders, and it was just a paper SMS, and it worked for him. And that's the scalability. And I think as we see more education come out, more webinars come out, more people are talking about this in the industry, it's going to really get some traction out there. More and more operators will share their story of the scalability of it and how they can introduce Part 5 and an SMS into their operation.
And to answer,
Yeah.
I think that was great, Brandon. I think that's a great example of why, Part 135 might be nervous about it, but how you really can. It is achievable. It is not a task that you're not going to be able to get to. Every single one of you, I am sure, will be able to get to it, but getting the leadership buy-in can be difficult. And I've always said there's two ways as a team member to be able to get leadership buy-in. You can either scare them into doing it, or you can encourage them into doing it. And I think it really depends on your leader. If you are wanting to scare them into it, use some of the examples I've used. Look at your teams, look at what's going on. Also, I doubt that CEO wants to sit down with a lawyer and have to think through all the liability caused by not having that safety buy-in, by having something happen that is totally preventable, where you could have enhanced the safety system. Also, encouraging, they don't want to, the other part is, a lot of the leadership might not be trained in crisis communications. And it's great if they don't have to be. You don't want your leaders having to be trained in it because you have an SMS in place that has at least helped mitigate these risks. So that's my scaring tactic into it. Encouraging instead is really getting the buy-in, showing that it is achievable, showing that it is not meant to put you out to business, showing that you can set yourself apart as being the best of the best in the industry, really having SMS systems that work and really getting excited about it, showing what all has been done, showing how those risk mitigation techniques have helped you identify not only hazards, mitigate the hazards, and showing that the systems are working, encouraging leadership to get that buy-in there. I think, the encouraging method is the way I would suggest to go to begin with, but also using examples of why the FAA didn't just want to come up with an new updated rule for their health. Trust me, that was a huge lift on their part. So they're doing this for a reason. And I think really explaining the underlying reason to leadership is a good way to go about it. Steve, did you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, when it comes to leadership buy-in, I mean, a lot of times just speaking the language of the check writers helps tremendously, right? I mean, being able to demonstrate that an investment in an SMS and an overall investment in safety is an investment in the organization, right? If we can reduce risks and the potential for injuries and accidents, each one of those injuries and accidents, they have an associated costs, right? As well. So it's sort of an ounce of prevention type of approach. There's a statistic somewhere from the OSHA website. Every dollar invested in safety has a $4 return. It's true. When we can get in front of problems or in front of hazards before they become reportable injuries or, even worse deaths or accidents, it's money well spent. And so I've found that when it comes to getting buy-in from the leadership to invest in what is going to cost them some money up front, being able to demonstrate that it's going to save them money in the end while also improving their culture and improving their bottom line, it helps really to translate that. And Brandon, just to kind of double down and reinforce what you'd said, is a lot of times folks see SMS as something that's too big or complex to understand. It doesn't have to be. It's a lot of it is you're already doing it. You may not have just written it down or formalized it in a way and put the name SMS on it. Anywhere you start is better than nowhere at all. And obviously with new Part 5 rule coming to 135 operators, you're going to have to start, right? It's going to be a requirement. There's another question that came in that says, we have a VP SMS. How do you see that transitioning? Can you give me a little bit more context there, Henry, on your question?
At the volunteer program?
There you go. Thank you, Brandon. So great question. So one of the actually touches on a nice segue that we're going to be talking at in our next part of this series, which is the dispelling myths. So one of the things that we're hearing amongst our charter operators out there is the feeling that the new Part 5 rules are going to be much more onerous, right? More difficult to achieve than what has been put out there in the NPRM, or it's going to what they already have for an SMS is going to be modified in some significant way. That is not true. What's going to happen with the way an NPRM works is whatever was published, you cannot make the final rule more restrictive or harder to achieve than what was out there. So Jenny, you had mentioned in the beginning about letting people review the NPRM. I think I have a link somewhere here that I'll be able to drop in the chat. But the key takeaway that we're seeing with these new proposed rules is that you're not submitting something to the FAA for approval necessarily. What you're submitting to them is essentially your compliance statement. And then what the FAA's role is to come in afterwards and say, and make sure that you are meeting what you said you would do. Is that accurate, Jenny?
It is accurate. And in addition to what you said, Steve, is on NATA's website, which is www.nata.aero. You can go to the government relation or resources tab. I don't have it open because you all are seeing my screen, but you can go in to see what we've done on that page. You will be able to also go on and see the comments that NATA submitted to the FAA in regards to the SMS, the NPRM. So you can actually read what we wrote and are sharing our concerns for the industry that I do know the FAA really has taken into place. One thing again around the voluntary program, I don't want to speak, Henry, for your for how it went for you all, but one thing that some of the Part 135 operators that have gotten a voluntary program for SMS in place had said was they got this whole thing into place and there was no FAA that could check on it. They were so low down on workforce. How are they going to do that? And that is something that the FAA is aware of. They do know that they are working right. Once they have the final rule, they are working very, very closely to make sure that the inspectors, auditors are able to do this and that they are able to get, approval within those places and make it, hopefully not as challenging as it was when you went through trying to get the voluntary program approved. So that is something that they are aware of and have addressed with us.
Thank you, Jenny Ann. And I see Brandon has dropped a link to our website that talks about the SMS rules and all the information Jenny just discussed there. So thank you for sharing that, Brandon. You are very welcome, Henry. I appreciate you joining us today and contributing with your questions. We've got some time left, so if there are any other questions or while we give people an opportunity to think about it, Jenny or Brendan, in terms of our upcoming, I'll point this more towards Jenny and a shameless plug for NATA's Air Charter Summit. Why might folks in our audience want to attend?
Great. Absolutely. So our Air Charter Summit is going to be the event of the summer. Let me just tell you, we have some great panelists lined up, and I will try and make you all a promise that it's not just going to be people speaking at you all day saying, you've got to do this, or you've got to do this, or this isn't working. It really is an info-filled event that is going to leave you with not only better education, but a great resource for networking, meeting your peers. That's one thing InfoShare that I really love that the Air Charter Summit is going to focus on is, like I said, we learn from each other, especially with SMS programs, helping talk about different hazards. As they mentioned, we're going to have a panel specifically based on SMS, and we will have FAA officials on that panel. We have, of course, others as well on the panel. We're also going to be talking about, one of our panels, and you will be able to see this if you go to the NATA website. You can click on the agenda, and we're continually adding speakers to it. But the agenda, we have one on resilient skies. So we're going to be talking about, crisis, emergency management, also how the industry can better work with the regulators to enhance safety, to enhance the industry as well, and policies around it. We're going to cover the new mental health aspects that came out. We're going to cover security. We also have a really unique panel for how advanced air mobility is coming, whether, some of us might have some questions around it, but, they might have some SMS or they might have a need for SMS because guess what? Some of the, people that are in advanced air mobility are going to be Part 135 operators. So looking at that aspect, and finally, we're going to have a panel on workforce, which is something I've already touched on, along with someone from the FAA specifically talking about workforce. And then one on media observations. I said I had the TV on, I had C-SPAN on, but we're constantly seeing in the media new perspectives and how we can get a better media perspective around business aviation. So it's going to cover a lot of topics, but based on this one, I'm very, very, very excited for the SMS panel and who we have on it. And fingers crossed that the rule will be out by then. And if not, we'll still be able to share a lot of information about it.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jenny Ann. Thank you, Brandon. We don't have any additional questions, so I appreciate everybody coming in and joining us today. Stay tuned for part 2 of this series on May 9th at 1 p.m. NATA.aero, that's NATA.aero to sign up and register, and we look forward to seeing you there. Thanks, everybody.
I know.
Thank y'all.
Bye-bye.